and I didn't want to see what happened. So like I closed my eyes when the instant of that flash happened, and the boat was moving as this happened, and so I turned back around and came back to where he was and got to the stump, and I knew I couldn't leave him there being shot. So I was going to have to do something to cover this up.
26 years ago, on a cold morning at Lake Seminole along the Florida-Georgia border, 31-year-old Mike Williams left home before dawn for what should have been a routine duck hunting trip. By that evening, he was supposed to be celebrating his wedding anniversary with his wife. Instead, his truck and boat were found abandoned, and Mike was nowhere to be found. Investigators quickly concluded that he had likely fallen from his boat, drowned, and been consumed by alligators. It seemed like a tragic accident, but there was one problem. Mike Williams became the only known drowning victim on Lake Seminole whose body was never recovered. As the years passed, the official explanation remained unchanged. Yet his mother refused to stop asking questions. Then, nearly 2 decades later, an unrelated crime triggered a confession, led investigators to a hidden burial site, and exposed a truth no one had expected. What really happened to Mike Williams would reveal a murder hidden in plain sight for 17 years. Before we dive deep into this story, please let us know where you are watching from. And if stories like this touch you, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. For people living around Lake Seminole, boating accidents were not unusual. Created in 1957, where the Chattahoochee and Flint rivers meet before forming the Apalachicola River, the reservoir had long been known as a popular destination for fishing and duck hunting. During hunting season, it was common to see hunters launching boats before sunrise and spending hours navigating the lake's shallow waters, submerged vegetation, and countless tree stumps. Because of those conditions, the explanation offered after Mike Williams disappeared initially seemed plausible. Searchers believed he may have struck a submerged stump, fallen into the cold water, and drowned. When his body failed to surface, many accepted the theory that alligators and other wildlife had destroyed the remains. For years, much of the community believed the case had already been solved. One person never accepted that conclusion. Mike's mother, Cheryl Williams, continued asking a question that investigators could not answer. If Mike had truly drowned, why was he the only victim in the lake's history whose body was never found? That question would eventually become the foundation of one of Florida's most extraordinary cold case investigations. Mike Williams appeared to be building the kind of life many people spend years pursuing. Raised in the Tallahassee area, he was known as hardworking, ambitious, and deeply devoted to his family. Friends and co-workers described him as someone who rarely slowed down. After attending Florida State University, he built a successful career as a property appraiser and earned a reputation for being exceptionally dedicated to his work. According to people who knew him, Mike often worked long hours and was determined to provide a comfortable future for his wife and daughter. By the year 2000, life seemed to be moving in the right direction. Mike was married to his high school sweetheart, Denise Williams. The couple had a young daughter, and family members believed they were planning for the future. According to relatives, Mike and Denise had recently discussed having another child. They were planning a trip to Hawaii in the spring, and Mike expected to travel internationally for work later that year. Nothing about his behavior suggested a man preparing to disappear. In fact, everything suggested the opposite. Just months before his disappearance, Mike had purchased a substantial life insurance policy through his close friend Brian Winchester. Brian was more than just a friend. He had known both Mike and Denise for years and was considered one of the people closest to the couple. Then came December 16, 2000. It was a Saturday. According to Denise, Mike woke up before dawn and left home with his boat to go duck hunting at Lake Seminole, a large reservoir located along the Florida-Georgia border. Hunting was one of Mike's favorite hobbies. He had been duck hunting since he was a teenager and was familiar with the lake. The couple had plans later that evening. December 16 was their wedding anniversary, and they were supposed to celebrate together after Mike returned from the hunt. But Mike never came home. Around noon, concern began to grow. Denise reportedly contacted family members and friends after realizing Mike had not returned as expected. Soon, Brian Winchester and others began searching areas of Lake Seminole, where Mike frequently hunted. What they found only deepened the mystery. Mike's Ford Bronco was parked near a remote boat launch on the Florida side of the lake. Not long afterward, searchers located his boat floating nearby. His shotgun was still inside its case. Mike was gone. Authorities quickly launched a search operation involving boats, helicopters, divers, and volunteers. At first, investigators believed they were dealing with a tragic but straightforward accident. The area where Mike hunted was known as Stump Field, a section of the lake filled with submerged tree stumps left behind when the reservoir was created decades earlier. Searchers theorized that Mike may have struck one of those stumps, fallen into the cold water, and drowned. Because duck hunters often wear chest waders, investigators believed the heavy gear could have filled with water and pulled him beneath the surface. Initially, the theory seemed reasonable, but almost immediately there were problems. Search teams expected Mike's body to surface within days. It never did. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. Search crews repeatedly combed the area. Divers searched underwater. Helicopters surveyed from above. Volunteers joined the effort. There was no sign of Mike Williams. 10 days after he disappeared, searchers recovered a camouflage hunting hat. However, investigators could not conclusively connect it to Mike. By February 2001, the active search was suspended. Officials still believed Mike had likely drowned, but they acknowledged something important. They had found no definitive evidence proving that a boating accident had actually occurred. That distinction would become increasingly significant in the years ahead. Then, 6 months later, another discovery appeared to support the drowning theory. An angler found a pair of waders floating in the lake. Divers searching nearby recovered a hunting jacket and a flashlight. Inside one of the jacket pockets was a hunting license bearing Mike's name and signature. To many observers, this seemed like confirmation. The recovered items appeared to explain what had happened. A judge subsequently declared Mike legally dead. The ruling allowed insurance claims to move forward, and Denise received approximately $1.5 million from various life insurance policies. For most people, the case appeared closed. A hunter had drowned. His body had somehow never been recovered, and nature had erased the remaining evidence. But there was one problem that refused to go away. Lake Seminole had seen many drownings over the years, yet Mike Williams was the only known drowning victim whose body had never been recovered. At first, that fact seemed unusual. Eventually, it would become impossible to ignore. As the years passed, the official explanation remained largely unchanged. Mike Williams had supposedly drowned in Lake Seminole. Authorities believed his remains had been consumed by wildlife. The case appeared closed. But one person never accepted that conclusion. Mike's mother, Cheryl Williams, refused to stop asking questions. From the beginning, she struggled to believe that her son's body could simply vanish without a trace. The explanation never made sense to her. The more she learned about the circumstances surrounding his disappearance, the more convinced she became that something was wrong. While others moved on with their lives, Cheryl began her own investigation. She placed newspaper advertisements. She distributed flyers. She erected billboards. She stood on street corners holding signs asking for information about her missing son. Year after year, she continued searching for answers. Many people would have given up. Cheryl did not. Her persistence eventually persuaded authorities to take another look. In 2004, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement reopened the case. As investigators reviewed the evidence, they discovered a growing list of inconsistencies. The first involved the boat launch where Mike's vehicle had been found. Investigators learned that Mike typically used nearby concrete ramps when launching his boat. Yet on the day he disappeared, his truck was discovered near a muddy, undeveloped launch area. No one could explain why he would have chosen that location. Then investigators examined the boat itself. When it was recovered, the engine was off. The fuel tank remained full. Representatives from the boat manufacturer reportedly told investigators that if Mike had accidentally fallen overboard while operating the vessel, the engine likely would have continued running. Instead, the boat appeared strangely stationary. Questions continued to accumulate. Investigators also reviewed weather conditions from the day Mike disappeared. A storm had moved through the area shortly afterward. Based on wind patterns, authorities believed an abandoned boat should have drifted much farther than Mike's vessel actually did. Again, The evidence did not fit the accepted narrative. But perhaps the biggest problem involved the alligator theory. For years, many people had accepted the explanation that alligators consumed Mike's remains. Then investigators consulted experts. What they learned changed everything. According to specialists, alligators generally become far less active during winter months. Water temperatures at Lake Seminole had dropped significantly after Mike disappeared. Some nights fell below freezing. Portions of the shoreline even developed ice. Under those conditions, experts said, it was highly unlikely that alligators would have fed on a human body. Even more importantly, they explained that complete consumption of an adult male without leaving significant remains would be extraordinarily unusual. The theory that had supported the entire case suddenly began to collapse. Then investigators revisited the recovered clothing. The waders showed no signs of animal damage. There were no tooth marks, no tears, no evidence suggesting they had spent 6 months underwater. The hunting jacket appeared unusually well preserved. The flashlight reportedly still functioned. To investigators, the items looked less like evidence of a drowning and more like objects that may have been placed there later. Another detail stood out. Friends described Mike as an experienced and safety-conscious hunter. According to people who hunted with him, he normally waited until reaching his destination before putting on his waders. That was standard safety practice. If he followed that routine, why would he have been wearing them while operating the boat? By this point, many investigators no longer believed Mike had drowned. The problem was proving what had actually happened. Years had passed. Evidence had disappeared. The original search had never been treated as a homicide investigation. The scene had not been secured. Volunteers had walked throughout the area. The boat had been returned. The truck had been returned. Potential forensic evidence was gone forever. Investigators found themselves trapped. They had growing suspicion, but they lacked proof. Meanwhile, another development attracted attention. Authorities learned more about Mike's life insurance policies. They also began hearing allegations that Brian Winchester and Denise Williams had been involved in a long-running affair. The implications were difficult to ignore. Brian had sold Mike a substantial life insurance policy. Denise had collected the proceeds, and several years after Mike disappeared, Denise married Brian. The two eventually moved into the same home where Mike and Denise had once lived together. To Cheryl Williams, the situation seemed impossible to overlook. While she spent years fighting to keep the investigation alive, the people increasingly attracting suspicion appeared to be living normal lives. Despite mounting concerns, investigators still lacked enough evidence to bring charges. Eventually, the Federal closed its investigation. The mystery remained unsolved. More than a decade had passed. Mike Williams was still missing. No arrests had been made, and the truth remained buried. Cold cases are often solved by new technology. Others are solved by chance. The Mike Williams case was broken open by something entirely different: a collapsing marriage. By 2012, Denise Williams and Brian Winchester were no longer together. The relationship that had survived for years began falling apart. Eventually, divorce proceedings followed. As tensions increased, investigators would later learn that Brian appeared increasingly worried about what Denise might reveal. Then came August 2016. According to authorities, Brian hid inside Denise's vehicle and confronted her at gunpoint. The incident unfolded during a period of intense conflict surrounding their divorce. Denise later reported the encounter to law enforcement. Brian was arrested. At first glance, the crime seemed unrelated to Mike Williams, but investigators immediately recognized an opportunity. For years, they had suspected that people connected to Mike's disappearance knew more than they were saying. Now one of those individuals was facing serious criminal charges. As prosecutors pursued the kidnapping case, pressure mounted. Eventually, Brian Winchester agreed to cooperate. What followed changed everything. Brian confessed. According to his account, Mike's death had never been an accident. He told investigators that he and Denise had maintained a secret romantic relationship for years. The affair, he claimed, began long before Mike disappeared. Over time, Brian said, discussions about a future together evolved into discussions about eliminating the obstacles standing in their way. Mike. According to Brian, various plans were considered before they settled on a staged hunting accident. The idea was simple. If Mike disappeared during a duck hunting trip, investigators would assume he drowned. No one would suspect murder. On December 16, 2000, Brian said he met Mike at Lake Seminole. According to his confession, he persuaded Mike to put on his waders. Then he pushed him into the water. The plan was for Mike to drown. Brian claimed Mike managed to reach a tree stump and cling to it. What happened next became one of the most haunting details in the entire case. According to Brian's testimony, Mike called for help. Rather than helping him, Brian fired a shotgun blast. Mike died at the lake.
And I didn't know how to get out of that situation. And I ended up circling closer towards him. And he was in the water. And as I passed by, I shot him.
Now Brian faced a new problem. A gunshot victim could not be explained away as an accidental drowning. According to his confession, he transported Mike's body away from Lake Seminole and buried it in a remote area near Carr Lake in Leon County. Then he returned to normal life. For nearly 17 years, the secret remained hidden. No body, no crime scene, no murder weapon, nothing. Then investigators received information identifying the burial location. In October 2017, authorities launched an extensive excavation effort. For days, crews dug through mud and standing water. Search teams worked long hours. At times, it appeared they might come up empty-handed once again. Then they found human remains. DNA testing confirmed the identity. After 17 years, Mike Williams had finally been found. The discovery shattered the official narrative that had existed since 2000. Mike had not drowned. He had not been eaten by alligators. He had been murdered. And one of Florida's most baffling missing person cases suddenly became a homicide investigation. The discovery of Mike's remains transformed the legal landscape almost immediately. Investigators now had what they had lacked for nearly 2 decades. Proof that Mike Williams was dead. Proof that he had not drowned. And a witness willing to describe what happened. In May 2018, Denise Williams was arrested and indicted on charges including first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit first-degree murder, and accessory after the fact. The indictment alleged that the conspiracy had begun months before Mike disappeared. The case attracted national attention. For years, many people had followed the mystery. Now prosecutors were preparing to explain what they believed had happened. At trial, Brian Winchester became the state's most important witness. He testified extensively about his relationship with Denise. According to Brian, the two had maintained a secret affair while still married to other people. He described discussions about killing Mike and eventually presented himself as the person who carried out the plan. Jurors also heard recordings and testimony from additional witnesses. One of the most significant pieces of evidence involved a recorded conversation in which Denise was confronted with information about the crime. Prosecutors argued that her responses demonstrated knowledge she should not have if she were innocent. The defense strongly disagreed. Denise maintained that she had nothing to do with Mike's death. Her attorneys emphasized that no physical evidence directly connected her to the killing. They also questioned why Brian Winchester, who admitted shooting Mike, was not facing murder charges. The trial ultimately came down to credibility. Who was telling the truth? The woman accused of helping plan the crime, or the man who admitted carrying it out? After hearing days of testimony, jurors deliberated for approximately 8 hours. They returned guilty verdicts. In December 2018, Denise Williams was convicted. The following year, she received a life sentence. For Cheryl Williams, the verdict represented the culmination of nearly 2 decades of persistence. She had spent years refusing to accept an explanation that never made sense. Now a jury had concluded that Mike's death was the result of a criminal conspiracy, yet the legal story was not finished. In 2020, an appellate court overturned Denise's murder conviction. The court concluded there was insufficient evidence supporting that specific charge. However, the conspiracy conviction remained intact. As a result, Denise continues serving a lengthy prison sentence for conspiracy to commit murder. The outcome created a remarkable legal reality. Authorities established that Mike Williams was murdered. Investigators uncovered the conspiracy. A body was recovered. A confession was obtained. Yet no one was ultimately convicted of Mike Williams' murder itself. The story of Mike Williams is about far more than a single crime. It is about persistence. It is about assumptions. And it is about how the truth can remain hidden for years, even when it exists in plain sight. For 17 years, Cheryl Williams refused to stop asking questions. She challenged official conclusions. She pushed investigators to look deeper. She continued searching, long after others believed the case was over. Without her efforts, there is a real possibility that Mike Williams would still be listed as the victim of a tragic hunting accident. The case also highlights the danger of early assumptions. Once investigators accepted the drowning theory, critical opportunities were lost. Evidence was not preserved. The scene was not secured. Alternative explanations received less attention. By the time authorities realized something was wrong, years had already passed. And perhaps most importantly, this story is about the human cost of time. A daughter grew up without her father. A mother spent nearly 2 decades searching for answers. Friends and family lived with uncertainty year after year. For 17 years, the truth remained buried alongside Mike's remains. Today, the mystery itself has been solved. We know Mike Williams did not drown in Lake Seminole. We know he was the victim of a homicide. We know the accident that fooled investigators was carefully staged. But even after the arrests, the trials, and the convictions, one haunting reality remains. No court has ever convicted anyone of Mike Williams' murder, and perhaps that is why this case continues to resonate with so many people. Because even when the truth finally emerges, justice and closure are not always the same thing.